Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Partala. Today's topic is overcoming adversities through resilience. We feel resilience is very important when you want to bounce back. We have Jitendra sir over here who is going to share his story that after facing a very challenging situation in life, how he has bounced back. I would like to speak a little bit about sir, although this is not enough. Jitendra sir is a seasoned technologist and executive. He has extensive experience across startups, large-scale tech companies and government. In 2017, he co-founded PlanetScale, a cloud database company based on the open source project Vitess. He led PlanetScale to a significant growth before stepping down as CEO in 2021. Jitendra sir is a graduate of Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. He has spent last 30 years in Silicon Valley, contributing to major companies like Google, YouTube, and Dropbox. After sabbatical in 2022, he focused on personal growth. He now advises and invests in innovative companies in US and India. His passion for technology and mentoring continues to guide his work as an executive coach advisor, helping shape the future of emerging tech ventures. I welcome you, sir. Thank you so much. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Hima. Everybody can hear me properly? So it's really nice to be here with you all today at IIT, my alma mater. I actually came here 40 years and 1 month ago. So 1984 July was when I joined IIT, so that's how much older than you I am. The campus is as green as it used to be. The hostel that I was at, Hostel 3, doesn't look that different from the way it did when I was here. So it would be tempting for me to think that I actually understand you all. But I don't think that's quite true because the world has changed a fair bit outside. In the last 40 years, I think it's a lot more competitive. There is a lot more anxiety in your generation, I believe, than there was in ours. So that is one thing. The second is that, there are differences amongst us. I'm a man, so I don't know how it is to be a woman. I don't know how it is to be attracted to somebody of the same sex. I don't know how it is to be from a so-called lower caste. So there are these differences amongst us. But there is still the commonality that we are all IITians. So I'm going to go with that thread and continue. But if you think that I'm talking about something where I'm not taking your experience into consideration, stop me. I grew up in a second-tier city, Aurangabad, and I grew up speaking Marathi at home and Marathi and Hindi at school. I had basically zero conversational English when I showed up at IIT. And I was very ashamed of my Marathi accent because the people here were a lot more cosmopolitan than I was. And because of this shame, there was some reaction to it, because when people talked about them going to having gone to cathedral or them having gone to other posh schools, I would make it a point to say that I went to Saraswati Goan Aurangabad, right? It sounds funny, but at that time it wasn't. At that time it was pretty. It seemed like something that defined me. It seemed like something that I would never get over. I really wish that at that time there was somebody around who told me that it's going to be fine, you're going to grow up into your skin, you're going to be comfortable with yourself. So if any of you feel that, I would like to be the person telling you that it's going to be fine. This particular experience of going to a bigger place and feeling out of place seems to be pretty universal actually. I recently came across a poem by a Turkish Nobel laureate about exactly this topic. And I would like to read a few of the lines of that poem to you. It's called Youth, and the name of the poet is Sezla Milos. And I'm just going to read the first two stanzas, which are sort of relevant to what I was talking about. And they go, "You are unhappy and silly youth. Your arrival from the provinces in the city, misted over window panes of streetcars, restless misery of the crowd. You are dread when you enter a place too expensive, but everything was too expensive, too high. Those people must have noticed your crude manners, your outmoded clothes, and your awkwardness. There were none who would stand by you and say, you're a handsome boy or a girl. You're strong and healthy. Your misfortunes are imaginary." And then it goes on. I really love this poem, and I thought I would leave it with you. So that was about me coming to IIT Bombay. I did not study much. I did a lot of mountaineering. I read a lot of fiction. I read a lot of science fiction specifically. I listened to a lot of music. I had a lot of late night conversations about philosophy, about how to live one's life. We used to call them CAC sessions. Do you still call them CAC sessions? So this is one thing that has changed. And that's what I did here for 4 years. But I would like to talk about one experience that I had when I was in the second year at IIT, which was the death of a close friend of mine, somebody who was in my wing. His name was Mihir Sarkar, and he had gone for a rock climbing trip, and he fell and he died. And when you are 19 or 20 and when you experience a death, it's very devastating. If any of you have experienced the death of a close person, my heart goes out to you. Please remember that lack of motivation is normal, confusion is normal. Please seek out help. At that time, we didn't have counselors. You were supposed to sort of talk to your friends and get over it yourself. And that's what I did. But confusion is normal, lack of motivation is normal. Take it seriously, have compassion for yourselves, and go seek help. After Mihir's death, I became very close to his family. They became my second family here in Bombay. They're from Bombay. And I used to, when Mihir was around, I used to go to their place on the weekends sometimes with Mihir. And after that, I continued to go. I became close to his mother, I became close to his father, and they became a second family for me. They helped me a lot after I lost my fingers. So again, what I want to emphasize is that if you experience a loss like this, seek out help and don't try to deal with it yourselves. So let's come to my fourth year. I don't know how many of you are fourth year students, but fourth year is pretty, any final years here? Okay, so it's a pretty hectic year. You have to finish your BTech project. You are worried about if you're applying abroad, you have to keep on working on that. Otherwise, you have to worry about placement. I was also the mountaineering secretary that year. A lot needed to be done. And we were also planning this expedition to a peak called Gangotri 3. And so I was also training for it. I was pretty much in the best shape that I have been in my life. I used to run 5 miles in about 40 minutes. I used to carry a backpack of about 40 pounds, and I used to walk 5 miles a day, and so on. and it was something that I looked forward to, the expedition. So we finished the semester and we started our expedition. And so now I'll tell you the story. I mean, I don't know if you all have noticed, I don't have fingers. So I'm going to tell you the story of the mountaineering expedition on which I lost my fingers. So this expedition was to a peak called Gangotri 3. Gangotri 3 is a peak in Gadhwal Himalayas. It's past Gangotri. There is Gangotri 1, Gangotri 2, Gangotri 3, past the Gangotri glacier. And we were going to climb the peak. And it was an alpine style, I mean, there are two styles of climbing. There is alpine style and there is expedition style. Alpine style is when you start from the bottom, just a team of 2 or 3, you climb all the way to the top in about a day, day and a half, and you come down. And expedition style is when you have a larger team, you establish a base camp. It's like a pyramid. So you start with a bunch of stuff, you put it on camp 1, then you take a subset of that, you put it on camp 2, maybe a camp 3, and then finally a few of them go to the summit and come back, and then you dismantle all the camps and you come. That's the expedition style of climbing. That's how we were climbing. So there were about 9 of us IITians, and we had hired a high altitude porter who had done this peak before. So Gangotri 3 is a little over 21,000 feet in height. It's sort of considered an intermediate peak. There is an ice wall that you need to climb, and the high altitude porter that we had hired, he knew the region well, and he had done the peak before. He knew the weather, and so we felt that we were pretty well equipped with his help to climb this peak. All of us had done the basic course in mountaineering. We had done a fair amount of hiking in the Himalayas. So in about 10 days' time, we had established our base camp, camp 1, and a small camp 2. And now it was the time to actually do the summit attempt. The first day, on 16th of May, 5 of us did the summit attempt. There was me, there was Kharkar, there was Chitai, there was Naru, so the 4 of us IITians, and then the 5th was the high altitude porter. So we climbed. There are, at those altitudes, there are very fast winds. The oxygen, you really feel the lack of oxygen. I don't know how many of you have been into the Himalayas, but 21,000 feet is pretty high. And the high altitude porter, he climbed the ice wall, he put a piton at the top, he fixed a rope, and the rest of us used that rope to climb that ice wall. And we went up, and on that day, we decided at around 4 o'clock that we needed to come back because we didn't have enough time to go climb the peak and come down. So we turned around, we came down, we left the fixed rope there, and we knew that the next day when we try the peak again, we are going to have the fixed rope there, so that we are not going to spend as much time climbing that path. We could just use the same rope and we could go back. Our plan was to start at 3:30 in the morning the next day, but it took us a while to start, so we were a little late. We started at 4:30 in the morning. And Naru was not feeling well, so that day Naru wasn't there with us. So this is May 17th, and it's me, Kharkar, Chitai, and the high altitude porter who are doing the climb. So it was a brilliant day. We continued to climb. We went to the ice wall where the rope was there. We climbed past it, and I will show you how at the end of the climb, how it is. So you sort of climb like this, and then there is a bowl like this. This is a glacier. And then there is a ridge that gently climbs to the peak. It is the peak. And what we did was that we had come up here, we had climbed down into this bowl here, and this glacier is full of crevasses. and the crevasses are not visible, they are covered by snow. So you have to be very careful while traversing a snow field full of crevasses. So what you do is you all rope up. You all tie each other with a rope. The person in the front, they have an ice axe in their hand, and they keep on checking to see whether the snow is, whether there is a crevasse or not. And actually, in fact, when Jitendra was leading, he did fall into a crevasse. His fall was arrested by the second person, who was the high altitude porter. We pulled him out and we continued. But the point is that we were making progress very slowly across this field. And what we hadn't realized was that this tsunami was filling up with clouds. So within minutes, the clouds started pouring down into this bowl, and we were in a complete whiteout. We could not see anything. We could not see any. I don't know if any of you have been in the mountains and in a whiteout, but you literally cannot see anything beyond 3 to 4 feet. And we were in that situation very, very quickly. And so there was no, I mean, we were not that far from the summit, but it just didn't make sense to continue on, because there was another consideration, which is that we were somewhere here and we still could see our footsteps on the way out. If we continued up, our footsteps would be covered by the freshly falling snow, and then we wouldn't know. I mean, then traversing back would be as hard as it was going out. So we turned around and we started going back using our footsteps, right? We did cross this, but the snow was really, really falling, and we couldn't. The snow was falling hard. We could not see anything, and it started getting dark. And we decided that it did not make sense for us to continue to climb down, and that we are going to have to spend the night up in the mountain. We did not have tents. We weren't planning to spend the night in the mountains. So what did we do? We dug bivouacs into the mountainside, and we sat into them, and we put our sacks on our head. Now, we didn't just do that. We also anchored ourselves to each other. We put screws into we put anchors into the mountains, and we attached ourselves to the mountain. So we were pretty securely attached to the mountain. We stayed there, and we spent the night there. Now, there are 4 memories that I have from that night. The first memory is that me and Carter were talking. I think Chitay and the high altitude porter, they both had lost, either they were asleep or they had lost consciousness. I don't know. But the 2 of us were talking, and Carter said to me that he was afraid that this was not snow but an avalanche. And an avalanche is a very different thing than just a snowfall. It's basically a snow wall coming crashing on you, and it can basically suffocate you and you can die, right? Even in very, very heavy snow, you don't actually get buried. I mean, you can over a very large amount of time, but the rate at which the snow is coming doesn't going to suddenly bury you. But in an avalanche, that can happen. So Carter thought that that's what it was. And I told him that no, this is just very, very heavy snowfall. It's coming from all sides. Don't worry, don't leave. He wanted to leave, and because he thought that if we continue to sit there, we were going to die. So I told him, no, don't do that. Stay here. We are, anchored to each other. We are anchored to the mountain. Don't leave. That's one memory that I have. Then I have another memory. When I woke up, snow had stopped falling, and the sky was full of brilliant stars. If we wanted to, we could have gone down at that time. But I didn't have enough of wakefulness or enough of consciousness to actually decide to go down. And also it was dark. I mean, we might not have might not have seen the way at that time. But that's my second memory. My third memory is of hallucinations. We had spent the night a little over 20,000, almost 21,000 feet, and not a lot of oxygen in the air, and we were hallucinating. And so I remember, I think this was close to, it was close to the morning, and I remember this brilliant shade of violet filling up the sky, and a balloon, a large balloon, with the face like the high altitude porter on it. In retrospect, I think he was trying to wake me up, and he could not, right? But I was hallucinating. And the fourth memory is of being extremely cold through the night at some point in time, and having this sense that I'm going to die here. I am not going to make it back. And then feeling very, very sad about what my mother is going to think. That she is going to be really sad when she knows that I'm going to die. I died of it. That's the fourth thing. I woke up at around 9 in the morning. Carter was not there. I remembered that our conversation, and I thought that he probably left. That was at the back of my mind. I didn't know what had happened to him. Thought that he had left. I also thought that the high altitude porter must have left because he wasn't there. Jitendra was there, but so I tried to wake him up, and I couldn't for a while. And his eyes were sort of, you kind of read about people's pupils turning in their eyes. I actually saw that happen to him. And he was probably hallucinating also. So it took him a while to wake up, but he woke up. After he woke up, we sort of talked to each other, took stock of our situation, and we thought that maybe the high altitude porter has gone down and he will send rescue. Our friends were at the 70 camp, 2 or 3 of us were down there, and maybe they will come up and they will help us. But even before that, even before I woke up Jitendra, my hands were completely numb. I removed my gloves and saw that my fingers were black and stick-like. They were desiccated. And I knew that I was in deep trouble. I knew that I was going to lose my fingers. And there was this one moment of sheer panic. And I had to decide whether to give in to that panic or whether to push it aside. And I remember this very clearly, that I knew that if I did not set this panic aside, if I let myself panic, I was going to die on this mountain. I had to figure out how to get off the mountain. I could not afford to panic. And I did not. I just moved on to waking up Jitendra, and we both woke up. We both decided that even if the rescue was going to come, we have to go down. It doesn't make sense for us to wait here. So we roped up, and I put my gloves back on. I took my ice axe the best I could, and we just climbed down. So that day is pretty hazy in my mind. I don't know how much, we were looking for the ice wall and the rope that we had fixed, but we didn't find it. I think the snowfall that had happened the previous night had obscured, had covered up the rope, but it had also created, it had also covered up the ice. So now we could just climb down on the snow properly without it being too dangerous. So we climbed down, and I think around the time we're at the base of that ice wall, although we did not quite recognize it as the same ice wall, we saw Harker. He was lying face down, and we ran to him. We turned him around. He wasn't breathing. He was dead. Jitendra knew CPR, he had taken first aid course, so he tried to give him CPR, but it was of no use. And I realized that the fear that I had for myself, that my mother was going to be really sad, his mother was going to have the experience. But there wasn't anything that we could do. And so Chitra and I decided to we continued down. It took us a long time to reach down to the camp where, the summit camp. I think at around 4:30 or 5, we were a few hundred feet above the camp, and we could see our friends down there looking at us with binoculars. And then one of them started coming up on Nitin Patwardhan, and he sort of hugged us, and we came down with him, and he was crying, and we told him about Kharkar, and he just burst out crying. And then we went down to the camp. Our friends took care of us. They had hot water, they had tea, they made soup, and we spent the night there. There was another friend of ours up there, Deepak Patil. He sort of took charge of me and helped me. That night was also a lot of pain. I took my shoes off and I realized that my toes were affected too. My feet were swollen. My hands were not. My hands were also swollen. I mean, the healthy parts of my hands were swollen, and my fingers were desiccated basically. But my feet were truly swollen. It was difficult for me to take the shoes off. It was a painful night. I took some painkillers and so on. Next morning we woke up. We had to get off the mountain. We didn't know whether the weather was going to hold. I mean, that day we were lucky that the weather was good. So we started climbing down. That was a long day. Me and Deepak Patil just continued to climb down from summit camp to Camp 1, base camp, all the way to the road head. Found a shared taxi from there. So me, Deepak Patil, and Chitra made it down to Dehradun at the end of a very, very long day, and went to the Dehradun government hospital. And I don't know if you know how the government hospitals in our country are. They are not very well staffed, they are not very well equipped. And I remember sitting in this corridor waiting for maybe, it seemed like a long time. And then the doctor comes, and the doctor doesn't have a bit of compassion. He just looks at the fingers and says, "No, you're going to have to cut them off." I still feel angry at the doctor. Not that what he was telling me was factually wrong, but just the way he treated us. But one important piece of information that he gave us was that there was no gangrene, there was no danger of this spreading and more tissue getting lost. It was going to stay wherever it was. And once we figured that out, then we knew that we had time. So we took another taxi and went all the way to Delhi. And we must have reached Delhi at 2 o'clock in the morning or some really, really late time. And by this time, we were in touch with IIT through payphones. Now imagine, this is 1988. There are no cell phones. Even the telephones are sort of not as prevalent as they are. So we were using payphones to talk to people. And we got in touch with somebody from IIT. One of the IITians, I was in the 4th year, this person was in 1st year. His father was a bureaucrat in Delhi. We went to their place, we spent the night there. They arranged flight tickets for us to go to Delhi. Next morning I took the flight, we all took the flight to Delhi. Now again, look at the difference in your world and my world. In 1988, at the age of 21, I had never flown in an airplane. This was the first airplane flight that I took, and I hadn't expected it to be in this kind of a situation. Landed in Bombay. There's an older friend of mine, about 15 years older than me. His wife is a doctor. She was there, and I had talked to them. They were friends of, I told you about Mihir Sarkar. my friend who had died. So this older friend and his wife were family friends of the Sarkar family. And so Vidya, she was there waiting to pick us up. She picked us up, she took us to a clinic called Lard Clinic in Matunga. And there was a world-renowned hand surgeon associated with Lard Clinic. I later found out that people actually came from European countries to get their hands operated on by Dr. Joshi. And he was available to us. So he took a look at my fingers, and he sort of, what you see here basically is that this part, there was a very bright red line here, and then desiccated black fingers here. Similarly, very bright red line here, and then desiccated fingers outside of that. So it's called line of demarcation. And so he said that everything to the right of the line of demarcation, I don't see any hope of saving any tissue. It's all going to go. So more or less the same thing that the doctor in Dehradun had told us, but with a lot more compassion. Okay. So that was the news. In the meantime, my friend's brother was an IAS officer, and he knew the collector in Aurangabad. We didn't have a phone at home in Aurangabad. So, and there were riots going on in Aurangabad at that time. And so it was difficult for anybody to get in touch with my parents. So the collector organized a police jeep to go to my place, talk to my parents, tell my parents that I was in an accident, I was okay, and call me at such and such a number. So my father actually walked in the curfew to somebody who had a phone, called me, and I talked to him from the clinic. So that was the story of how we came back. I think that evening or the next evening, we went to see Kharkar's parents. And that was a pretty difficult visit to do. I still remember that. So this was in May of 1988. What we decided was to wait for a few months. We talked to some other doctors, and they said that maybe you can save some tissue if you take this treatment called hyperbaric oxygen. They give Navy divers this treatment where you are basically put in a hyperbaric chamber where there is the pressure of the air is higher, and there is some theory that the oxygen will diffuse into your tissue at higher pressure. So some doctor who knew mountain medicine thought that this would actually help us save some tissue. So we did that for a few weeks. Again, because you are at IIT, you have a lot of, one of the students here, her father was an IAS officer who ran the Port Trust of India, and they had access to hyperbaric oxygen chambers. And so we had access to hyperbaric oxygen chambers. These are the kind of things that are not accessible to general public, but we had access to it because of this. And so what was decided was that we will do that for a few weeks. Anyway, there was no danger of gangrene or the frostbite spreading. So we did try that for a few weeks. It wasn't any use. And we had, I had my first surgery, I think sometime in July. Now I want to tell you about something that I did in between, which in retrospect just sounds insane. By this time, at the end of my fourth year, my degree is in chemical engineering. And I had applied to various universities in the United States, and I had got a scholarship from University of Alaska at Fairbanks to do petroleum engineering there. And I was happy. I wanted to go to a beautiful place like Alaska. I knew that there was a lot of good hiking to be done there, and so on and so forth. But after this, I had decided that I was not going to go. So, if I was not going to go, somebody thought that it made sense for me to write GATE, right, to do MTech. And I wasn't a great student. I had 6.9 GPA, CPI, right? And GATE, as you know, is a pretty comprehensive test on everything that you have learned in the last 4 years. And I was frostbitten, my hands were completely desiccated. But I said, somebody suggested this, and I put this on, and I said I was going to write GATE. I couldn't write, of course, but there was somebody, a friend who was a freshman, who was on campus for some reason. His name was Manish Kothari. The semester hadn't started yet. He volunteered to write for me, and I remember sitting in that room, him sitting next to me, and him trying really hard to come up with the answers, and really not knowing a lot. And I must have done pretty poorly because I don't remember the score. I typically remember the score if I do well. And I feel really sad for, IIT is a place where everybody expects you to do stuff. Everybody expects that you can just get up and do things. And that's what was expected of me. And I also just sort of blindly went and did it. And I felt pretty sad that I didn't do well. And now I feel compassion for that me who did not say no, just went and did it. Anyway, so that happened. And then the first surgery took place where they basically chopped off all my fingers and all my toes. And my big toe had actually fallen off in between. It was really like badly frostbitten, and the big toe of my right foot just fell off. I mean, that's another story. And that doctor took it off without, just with local anesthesia. And I don't think that he gave me enough painkiller later, because that evening was probably the worst pain. Generally, I did not have acute pain through all this. I had constant pain. And it takes a lot of sort of emotional energy to deal with pain, but it wasn't acute pain. It was painful, but not too terribly painful. But that evening was pretty bad. Anyway, so after that, the first surgery, my fingers come off. And now I'll tell you about the reconstructive surgery. After that, I had 4 reconstructive surgeries. And the way this worked was that I would go to Lard Clinic. Dr. Joshi would operate on my hands. Then I would come back to the IIT hospital, and I would stay at the IIT hospital for about a week or 2 weeks, basically until they could take the stitches off. And then I would go back to the hostels, because what had happened in between was that Professor Kuchakar, who used to run chemical engineering department at that time, he was the HOD, he had offered me a research engineering position. And so I was working while staying at IIT. I had continued to stay on in the same room, and then I was also undergoing reconstructive surgery. So what did they do in the reconstructive surgery? So what they did was that you can see that my knuckles are here, and so they increase the web spaces. They sort of all through these 4 places they cut, and then they took skin off of my thighs and they stitched it up so that I get a lot more, I have a lot more gap in between, so that I get a lot more functionality here. They did the same thing here. There wasn't enough length to do the same thing on the left hand side. So 4 surgeries. And after each surgery, what they would do is that they would put a screw in the bones here, and then they would put a little something with a spring-loaded, something that would keep my, fingers sort of splayed so that it did not fuse, right? And the first time I looked at it, it looked pretty terrible. I thought that this was going to be pretty painful, but actually it wasn't painful. By this time, I had started learning to do things. I was actually riding a bicycle. And I remember riding a bicycle from here to RA Colony and back. with those things in my hands. Now, don't ask me why I did that, but I did that. We'll talk about that. So while this surgery was going on, I was learning to do things again. I mean, my friends were helping me. For the first few months, I really needed my friends' help. And one personality trait that I have is that I did not. I mean, there are some people who just hate to take help from other people. That's something that I did not suffer from. I did take help from everybody, and it was sort of based on the presumption that if they were in the same position, I would do the same thing for them. And so I took help from them. They helped me a lot. And I think the second sort of trait that I have is that I'm a bit of a showman. If I'm being watched, I like to do my best. So having friends around and watching, learning to do things with them sort of helped me. And I was really lucky to come across a book at that time. And that book was called Inner Skiing by an author named Timothy Galloway. And it's basically a book that teaches people how to improve their skiing. And the basic message of that book is that quiet your rational mind, quiet the dialogue that we have constantly going in your head. Like for example, if you are on the slope with the ski poles on, you might be thinking that I have terrible balance, I'm afraid I'm going to fall, I look terrible in these ski clothes. Whatever it is that is going on, he says, quiet that down and let your body tell you what you're feeling. So feel the wind in your face. Feel how your muscles in your thighs feel when you change the angle of the skis. So your body will learn how to do it if you quiet your mind and let the body absorb the feedback that is being given by the environment to you. And that was really, really useful to me. I learned how to tie my shoelaces, how to button and unbutton my clothes. I learned how to write. I'll show you right? And I learned to play table tennis. I really learned to play table tennis. This is something that I really love to do. I learned to ride a bicycle. I learned to ride a motorcycle. Later on, I learned to fly a single engine aircraft. Now, why did I do all these things? Why didn't I just stop with like tying my shoelaces and brushing my teeth and buttoning my buttons? Because at that time, I was really terrified of people's pity. I didn't want to be pitied. And so even when I learned to play table tennis, I did not stop I didn't want to be like dog playing the piano. Oh, Jiten doesn't have fingers and he plays table tennis. I didn't want to stop there. I wanted to be good enough that the friends that I was playing with were slightly afraid that they might lose a game to me. And you never pity somebody that you fear a little, right? And I mean, in retrospect, this fear of being pitied also stopped me from getting compassion that I needed from other people. I was sort of walling myself off from other people. But that's how it was. But I remember this one time when I was on the local train, and there was this old lady from a village sitting next to me. And many times people used to ask me, sometimes I used to answer them, sometimes I used to blow them off. This woman didn't say anything. She just took my hands in her hands and held them and looked at me with so much compassion that was one time. It didn't feel like pity, it was compassion. It was real compassion, and that was one time that I really felt that I was taken care of, that I got something from her. So, for many years after that, I used to tell myself that I had really dealt with losing my fingers. That the very first day when I woke up in the morning and I decided that I was not going to panic and I was going to get on with it because I wanted to live, that was the moment when I had dealt with losing my fingers. For many years I believed that. What I didn't realize was that every day there were moments when I felt sad about losing my fingers. So I'll give you examples. I mean, I can do everything that I need to do, but then I come across a new tool that I need to figure out, or some plastic packaging which is, created with the assumption that everybody has nails, right? Or like a credit card slot that's a bit too deep. So you can take things out with fingers, but with my stubs I cannot. Or a parking meter where the receipt comes out, where again I have to reach out and take it out. Now, none of these things are, or I'm standing in a supermarket line and my credit card falls down and I have to pick it up from the ground. Now, again, none of this is unsurmountable. If I actually just take a deep breath and think about it, I can do it. But there is that irritation of not being able to do it quickly or not being able to do it, and then the sadness that comes from that I don't have fingers. So those moments kept coming, and immediately my mind would go to, what's the point of feeling sad? Get on with it. So get on with it sort of became my mantra. And it served me well. I mean, I achieved an impressive amount, but at the cost of carrying this sadness that kept on accumulating, or I kept on carrying it. I mean, I never dealt with this sadness. So what happened in the meantime was that, I worked, so 1989, these 4 reconstructive surgeries. I still remember how good it felt for the last reconstructive surgery to be over and for me to really start living my life. 1990, I really gave Dr. Puchatkar, his money's worth, and I developed a computer program that I went to all the IITs and showed various, gave them the demonstrations. I not only wrote the program, I created documentation for it, distributed it, and hopefully I think we got a grant out of it and so on and so forth. But that's when I learned to program. In 1990, I joined Tata Consultancy Services. In 1992, they sent me to Chicago. I was there for 8 or 9 months. And that's where I met my now wife. She was a colleague of mine. Her name was Alicia. And we bonded over reading, our common love for hiking, and Indian food. Because when I went there, I started missing Indian food, and I started to learn to cook. And I learned to cook reasonably well. This was before Instagram. I didn't do it on Instagram. I just did it because I love to eat. I came back to finish the project here at TCS. Again, this was before email, before WhatsApp, of course. And she wrote me about 70 letters, and I wrote probably 20 or 25 back to her over a period of few months. We fell in love, got married 3 years later. I have 2 kids. So she's 12 years older than me. Didn't matter to us. We decided to get married. We were lucky we could have 1 biological kid. So our son is biological. He's 27. He and I, bond over books, politics. He sort of keeps me honest about my idolizing of people like Elon Musk. And we have 1 daughter whom we adopted from Shraddhanand Mahila Ashram here in Matunga. She's 21, and she has a sharp tongue and a great sense of humor. And she keeps me honest about my general sense of privilege as a upper middle class male. And so I also, I did well in my career. I joined a startup. I joined a startup called. First, I went. After I came back in 1993, I went and joined a company in Silicon Valley called Informatics Software, and I've lived there for the last 30 years. In the late 90s, I joined a startup called Intertrust Technologies. The word, if you have heard digital rights management, that company invented digital rights management. In early 2000s, I started my first startup. I tried to grow it organically. I was the only person, and I was acquired by a company called Veras Networks. That was 2003, 2004. 2005, I joined Google. When Google acquired YouTube, I was one of the first engineers to move to YouTube. YouTube was really growing very fast at that time. Me and my co-founder started this open source project called Vitesse, which helped YouTube scale its databases. I left YouTube because I got sort of tired of managing people, joined Dropbox. I was at Dropbox for a few years. Then I went and spent a few months at the White House in Washington, D.C. at a small agency called the U.S. Digital Service. Came back, and in late 2017, by this time Vitesse had become really popular, and then me and my co-founder decided to found this company called PlanetScale. We raised our series seed from a VC called Signalfire, Series A from Anderson Horowitz, Series B from Insight Partners. We were about 85 people. We had raised about $55 million by that time. The company was doing well, and the COVID hit. I was the CEO, my co-founder was the CTO, and we needed to do 30% layoffs. We became completely remote, and I think that's what sort of started causing me stress, and I started getting stress-related ulcers. And that's when I got an executive coach for me. And it was this executive coach who made me aware that I hadn't really dealt with using my fingers. Because we used to talk about my patterns of stress and anxiety that I would get. And I decided to step down and recommend to the board that the chief product officer be made the CEO in early 2022, and I took 2022 sabbatical, and then in 23 I just remained on the board. But he told me that whenever we try to figure out why you have this pattern of anxiety and stress, you talk about various things. You talk about childhood experiences, you talk about your relationship with your parents, but you never talk about this really big thing that happened in your life, which is that you lost fingers. You lost your fingers. And actually that was true. I mean, I had really figured out, the way I had figured out how to tie my shoelaces and put my buttons on, so on and so forth. I had also figured out how to make other people be at ease with losing my fingers. I would, especially in business contexts, I had a spiel, I would tell them quickly what happened, I would set it aside, and I would move on to doing other things. And I had done the same thing with my executive coach. I had given him a short synopsis of what had happened, and then I had left it aside and never talked about it afterwards. Then when I thought about it, I realized that I'm the kind of person who cries in movies, right? I'm an emotional person. And this was a really large and significant thing that had happened to me, but I had never cried about it. And so I started therapy. When I stepped down as the CEO, I had time now to start therapy. And what I realized was that, this pattern of pushing down the sadness that I felt for losing my fingers and telling myself to get on with it sort of became apparent through the therapy sessions. And sort of a breakthrough happened, I think around 4th or 5th session. I had this memory, I remembered this, that after I had lost my fingers, I was staying at my cousin's place in Kurla, and my father was with me, and the two of us were lying down on the ground sleeping, and I was in pain, and I must have been sort of sighing at night or something like that, because I remember him being next to me and him patting me by my back and sort of gently moving his hand on my back. And I first told her that I have this memory and I felt comforted. But later, after her prodding, I realized that I had actually not felt comforted. So I sort of come from a culture where physical affection is not sort of a natural. Once you become adult, you don't display physical affection to each other. And so maybe that was one thing that I was sort of holding myself back. But maybe another reason was that I was extremely afraid that I would fall apart if I accepted affection from him. And so I did not, you know how when somebody tries to hug you or when somebody tries to give you affection, you sort of hold yourself a little bit back. That's what I was doing. And then the therapist asked me, what would you have liked to do instead? If it was you today, what would you do? So what I said to her was that I would just hug him fiercely as I could, and I would cry and I would tell him that, and these words came out in Marathi, Baba bana माझी बोटे गेली. And that's when I cried. That's when I cried for the first time, for losing my fingers. And something interesting happened after that. So I've had this dream for many, many years. I think since the time I was 15 or 16 years old. It's sort of an anxiety dream. The dream happens in a tunnel. So I grew up near Aurangabad, and there is the fort of Daulatabad close to Aurangabad. And there are tunnels there. And I think that's where this dream is happening. There are these large boulders, and I'm climbing the boulders. And I am worried about whether I'm going to fall. I never fall. I reach the top, and the dream sort of ends with not triumph, but not disaster either, right? And I have had this dream since I was 14 or 15 until like my early 50s. Now, in that dream, even though it's a climbing dream, there is no reference to my fingers. When if I'm climbing these boulders, I have to hold those, I have to use my fingers. But there is no reference to it. I just feel like I'm climbing, right? So, about 30 odd years since I lost my fingers, I've had this dream without any reference to my fingers, right? After this experience, I think a few weeks after that, I had a slightly different version of the same dream. It was not in the tunnels this time, it was outdoors. And I think it was in a sort of water park. And there was a water slide, and there was a black net, nylon net. And I had to climb that net and walk to the water slide. And this time I was excruciatingly aware of my fingers. Like every hold that I took, I felt the same irritation that I feel when I'm dealing with plastic packaging or when I'm dealing with too deep a credit card slot or whatever. Every step, this thing, I was aware of it. I was aware of the pain in my fingers. Even now there is scar tissue here, it sometimes gets a little tender. So that I could feel. But I kept climbing, just like those dreams. I don't fall. I reach all the way to the top. And then there is a difference. In my usual dreams, there is only me. Here, there is an announcer. And then there is also an audience. And the announcer says, "Oh, wow, Jiten made it all the way to the top." And then he notices my fingers. And he says, "Oh, wow, he made it without fingers." And then the audience cheers. And I felt so good. I was like beaming. I was looking at them and I was beaming. This is how the dream ended. And then I get into the water slide and I slide down. That's how the dream ended. So with some help from my therapist, what I realized was that I had always done what was expected. I had always got on with it without any compassion for myself. What is the alternative? You have to do it, and so you do it. But you don't expect any appreciation, you don't expect any compassion. So there was a part of me which just got on, and the rest of me didn't have compassion for that part. And now that part was seen. Because another thing that I realized was that I was the climber and I was the announcer. The announcer was also me. It wasn't somebody outside. And finally I had compassion for that part of me which had got on with it and done what was expected. And I could feel that this was a big deal what I did. This was not just trivial. I mean, my usual thing used to be, yeah, it's not a big deal. Anybody who would have been in the same situation as me would have done the same thing. I mean, what was the alternative? That was what I said. But now I felt that it's okay. Of course, other people might do the same thing, but what you did was a big deal. And I felt compassion for myself. I felt appreciation for myself. And I think this happened after I cried, after I let everything that I had sort of blocked for about 30 years come out. So that's my story. What do I want to leave you with? What I want to leave you with is learn to have compassion for yourselves. Figure out, don't be harsh on yourselves. You are in a pretty stressful situation. And I think you all are also, achieving things, doing things that are hard. You look around and everybody's like you, and you feel that everybody as smart as you, everybody's doing more than you are or whatever. That does not diminish what you are doing or not doing. There may be times, there may be reasons when you don't feel motivated, when you are feeling down. Don't be harsh on yourself. Have compassion for yourselves. And that's the only way forward. And I really wish that I had learned this sooner. But, it's never too late. And that's where I'm going to stop. And I'm going to take questions. I don't know. We're already past an hour. Do we have time for questions?
I think we can have
Okay.
5 minutes. Maybe ask any questions.
Did you ever regret going to the mountain? No, did you?
I didn't allow myself to do that. That was a line of thought that I thought was not productive. I love mountaineering. I knew I wanted to do it. I'll tell you one thing. I had a little bit of guilt about doing mountaineering because the mother of my friend who had died, she was close to me. I was close to her. And I knew that she didn't want me to do this. I mean, it was always something that she disapproved of. So I always felt slightly guilty about doing it, but I still did it.
So you told us what made you go abroad after you've been through so much and your hands were all outside and you could have just kept everything outside, stayed with your parents and chose something else. You still went abroad even after what made you go there?
So I'll tell you one thing. I was terrified of what this meant for my future. Right? I didn't allow myself to look at it. I just focused on what I needed to do. But I really thought that all my options, all my opportunities had evaporated. I had no idea if I was going to be able to get a job. I had no idea whether I was going to be able to have a family. And I'll tell you truthfully that I really just buried all that fear down. I didn't face it. When I was 21, I was energetic. As I told you, I had a lot of friends who were helping me. And I just did not look back. I just looked forward. But I was terrified that if I did that, I would fall apart. I wouldn't be able to do anything.
Sir, you asked us to have compassion for ourselves, but what if we don't feel like we're doing something appreciable that we need to pat ourselves on our back for?
Just the fact that you are at IIT. How much did you have to, you probably worked hard for a few years to get here.
In my case, I think, sir, I wasted a lot of time during my preparation.
That's how all of us feel. I still feel that. The fact that you are here is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, so what you will suggest to a boy of in mid-20s and want to do hiking and mountaineering and roam in the world, what do you suggest, do it or what precautions?
So what I would suggest is go to the mountains to enjoy being in the mountains. That was something, I think, if you ask me for the mistake that I made, you asked me the question, why did you go to the mountain? So, I would say that I didn't go to the mountains with the right attitude. I wanted to climb, I wanted to achieve, I wanted to, right? I think you go to the mountains to enjoy being in the mountains. Enjoy the views, enjoy the wildlife, enjoy the feeling of being there. High places, mountains have a beauty of their own, but enjoy it. Don't go there to
Don't take it as a challenge.
Don't take it as a challenge. Exactly. Don't go there to climb a peak. Don't do it.
Basically, journey is more important than the destination.
Right.
Yeah. So I have also seen it. Actually, I've gone to the place called the Kedaganda. So I was not able to do the peak because the temperature was around -20. And we struck 5 over there. So I had for half an hour I've been I have not been to my mothers and father's space coming on the front. For half an hour I have in the situation that I will not be safe. But after coming to the town around 6 a.m. in the morning, we were there at 3:30 a.m. But I can totally relate what you have gone through, what the situation was.
So this could be a very weird question. But at the age of 21 when you had an accident, you said that get on with it, that's become a mantra, right? To become completely focused over there, whatever you want to achieve, you are just focusing on that particular things, right? And you are saying that you are having that anxiety and stress attack at the COVID hit, right? And somehow after the therapy you realize that you need to be compassionate with yourself to live with it. So suppose at that time, at the age of 20, when you have that particular kind of lesson, would you be at this particular place right now, or will you achieve all those things which you achieved during that particular journey?
I have asked myself that question. It's a good question. My answer is that I would probably be here, or I would probably achieve even more than this, or I would achieve the same amount with less effort, with less. My gut is a mess. right? I would probably be healthier. I mean, it's healed. It's much better now. But the answer is that I think that I would have more or less a similar trajectory in my life, but I would have done it with less effort.
So because I'm asking this question is that there are certain times in the life that the guy say ask, right? That you don't know that what you are doing is like, it will be sufficient or good enough to pet yourself or not, first of all. And all the time that we are over here, whatever that, as per my understanding that I am doing right now is not that much significant. Okay. And, but yeah, we also at that same time we have to think that, okay, get on with it. You have to do this, you have to learn this, you have to go through this so that you are, here for a bigger particular kind of reason, right? And if I feel that compensation with myself, then I'm pretty sure that at that time I have to take the decision that get on with it. It's not going to be helpful for me.
Is compassion going to be helpful or get on with it going to be helpful?
So the compassion is not going to be helpful with that.
So, see, compassion does not. It doesn't necessarily change what you do.
Okay.
It changes how you do it and your approach to yourself. You don't berate yourself. You don't say that, like, get up and do it. You say that you are worthy of love. You decided to do this. Come on, let's do it. It's a softer thing. It doesn't necessarily change what you do. What changes is how you treat yourself. It's also related to how you treat others. In general, you have more compassion for others too. Alright, thank you very much.